Hi, I'm really excited to be here with you this weekend. This is the first video that I've made especially for a weekend assignment for 500 days with NTI. But NTI, 1 John chapter 3, is one of the most advanced chapters in all of NTI. And so I wanted to show up and kind of go over that teaching with you. So I'm going to begin reading from NTI, 1 John chapter 3 at the very beginning. It says, the awareness of God is an awareness that is pure and looks on only that which is wholly true. This sentence is the first thing I want to talk about. The awareness of God is an awareness that is pure and looks on only that which is wholly true. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to review quickly the 4 principles of God. So this is the 4 principles of God. I've shown this to you a few other times during our 500 days. When this talks about the awareness of God is an awareness that is pure and looks on only that which is wholly true, it's really talking about the first principle of God. The first principle of God is often called the absolute. It's also called the source, the Father, nirvana. A Course in Miracles refers to it as heaven. It also refers to it as knowledge. This is pure, unmanifest, life, intelligence, isness. Pure, unmanifest, life, intelligence, isness. And again, this says that this awareness is pure and looks on only that which is wholly true. I want to share something with you from Bernadette Roberts. Bernadette Roberts is an author who has written about the 4 principles of God, although she doesn't use that term. And primarily she writes about the first and second principle of God. Because what happened for her is she woke up to the second principle of God, which is pure consciousness, often called the Christ consciousness or unity consciousness or the I am presence. And she thought at first that that was as far as one goes when one awakens. Waking up to that was as far as one goes. But then awakening continued to happen for her, and she woke up beyond that to the first principle of God. I have 3 of her books. The first one I have is called The Experience of No Self. This is the first book that I read. And it was pretty amazing from the very beginning. I really thought this book was amazing. It does have some of her personal experiences in it, some of which are looking at the darkness. So be aware that, there's some of that in here. Sometimes that scares some people. You just have to remember that the darkness is illusion. But that's what's in this book. The second book that I read, What is the Self, is more like a textbook that kind of explains what she realized as she went through these experiences, right? So this is more like a textbook, very, very good. I taught from this book for about a year in the Awakening Together Sanctuary as part of the Guiding Light. So there are several audios where I'm sharing from this book. The third book, The Path to No Self, I haven't read yet. It's actually the next book on my reading list. I'm reading a book right now by Teresa of Avila, Saint Teresa of Avila. But when I finish that, this is the next book on my reading list. So I'm excited to go into that. So Bernadette Roberts awoke to the first principle of God. I want to share a little bit with you about some of the things that she said. So I'm going to share my screen again. We'll start right here, reading some of Bernadette Roberts' words. She says, in contrast to the divine, the human condition is so terrible and devastating. that even the worst of descriptions could never do it justice. I am not referring here to sin, evil, or suffering, but rather to bare human existence itself, and the whole natural world included. What we usually think is so beautiful in this world is actually monstrous and unbearable to look at, but only in contrast to the divine. So, she's really describing how monstrous and unbearable a mountain may be, or an ocean may be, or a sunrise or a sunset may be, or a flower may be, as compared to God, as compared to the first principle of God. She's doing the best she can to describe the beauty of the first principle, because of course it's beyond words. So this contrast is pointing out, what we think is beautiful here is monstrous compared to the absolute. She continues, those who believe man can have both heaven and this world at the same time are very much mistaken. Such a notion is a total underestimation of God's utter transcendence. Compared to the divine estate, there is no beauty or happiness in this world. Thus, man cannot afford to have a glimpse or taste of the final estate and still expect to find this world acceptable. The ultimate estate is not of this world. It is not even compatible with it. For this reason, it is good that man does not see the reality of the divine beyond consciousness. Again, the reality of the divine beyond consciousness is the first principle of God. She says it's good that man does not see the reality of the divine beyond consciousness, for if he did, he could not endure this world. What man does not know, he does not miss. And what he does not know is how utterly transcendent the divine really is. So see how she's doing her best to point us to the ultimate of the absolute, the ultimate of that first principle of God, which we can't even imagine. I'm going to scroll on down right here and read another paragraph by Bernadette. She says, about all that can be said is that if we put together man's loftiest experiences of ecstasy, bliss, love, and all things ineffable, they fall as short of the divine condition as the size of an ant falls short of that of an elephant. I'll read this sentence again. About all that can be said is that if we put together man's loftiest experiences of ecstasy, bliss, love, and all things ineffable, they fall as short of the divine condition as the size of an ant falls short of that of an elephant. Consciousness's most lofty heavenly experiences of the divine are but the palest shadow of the ultimate divine condition, or heaven. So this is what NTI is pointing to when it opens up NTI 1 John chapter 3 and says the awareness of God is an awareness that is pure and looks on only that which is wholly true, right? She's referring to what that looks like when you see only that which is wholly true, but she can't put that into words. So she has to talk about what we know and say that's nothing compared to it. So again, the awareness of God is an awareness that is pure and looks on only that which is wholly true. This awareness is within you. Think about that. This awareness is within you. It is the core of what you are. It is in operation as God now. It's being itself now in you. However, you are not aware of your God awareness because you have allowed that which is false to be held in your mind as true. This is what is meant by purify yourself. You must make the decision to release all that is not true from the mind, because that which is not true is false. And so it is an obstacle to the total awareness of truth. So it's like A Course in Miracles says, we need to remove the obstacles to love's presence. Love, in this case, being the absolute, right? So this is why things like the superconductor process, rest, accept, and trust, the meditative loving all practice, this is why these things are so important, because they help us to purify ourselves of the faults. Verses 4-6 says, sin is a false idea. And sin, of course, is the idea that something is wrong, bad, whether it's something that we see out in the world or whether it's something that we see in ourselves. Sin is a false idea. This is one of the ideas that we have to let go of, the idea of sin. Wrong, bad, shouldn't happen, shouldn't be there, shouldn't be that way, right? We have to let go of all of this. Sin is a false idea. Sin is false because the idea it supports is also false. And that is the idea that you are separate from one another and from God. In other words, the only way we can have sin is to have separation. You have to have someone who can sin against someone else, or someone who can sin against something else. For example, you might say we sin against the world in the way that we pollute the environment, right? But you have to have separation. You have to have the victim and the victimizer in order to have sin. So sin is a false idea because it supports an idea that is false, right? So it's built on that idea. And that idea is that you are separate from one another and that you are separate from God. I'm going to jump down to verses 7-10, the second paragraph, which says, the world that you see comes from the thoughts that you think. And of course, this includes the thought of separation, and includes the thought of sin or bad or shouldn't have happened or shouldn't be that way, right? The world that you see comes from the thoughts you think. Now, this sentence is really important. The thoughts you think seem to be more than the thoughts that you perceive as in your mind alone. That is because you are not your mind alone. In other words, you in this sentence is not the individual. It's consciousness, right? So we're not talking about the thoughts in Regina's mind, at least not the thoughts in Regina's mind alone. They would be included, of course. But we're talking about the thoughts in what we might perceive as all minds. The thoughts that are in the mind of consciousness. I'm going to go back to the 4 principles of God again. So what we're really referring to here is the 3rd principle of God, which I call the creative process. It's often called mind. So we're talking about the thoughts that are in this mind. The thoughts that are in this mind right here are what create the world. I repeat, the thoughts that are in this mind right here are what create the world. These thoughts are really energies. So we do have the energy of separation that comes from that belief, the energy of sin, the energy of fear, the energy of unworthiness. We also have the energy of grace, the energy of acceptance, the energy of desiring to know the true self. There's both a right mind of consciousness and a wrong mind of consciousness. And all of these thoughts are a part of the creative process. They're often referred to as infinite potentialities, right? Infinite potentialities that can become manifest. And when they become manifest, they create the fourth principle of God, which is the world, which is the person, which includes the thoughts in our minds, the emotions that we feel. So when this says, the world that you see comes from the thoughts that you think. The thoughts that you think seem to be more than the thoughts that you perceive as in your mind alone. That's speaking to a person who believes they're an individual. We're not just talking about the thoughts that show up in Regina's mind. The thoughts that you think seem to be more than, of course, those thoughts are included, right? The thoughts that you think seem to be more than the thoughts that you perceive as in your mind alone. That is because you are not your mind alone. You are consciousness. This mind is your mind. And this is where the world comes from. I'll continue reading. There is no one mind alone, separate from other minds that are also alone. This is illusion. This is the belief in the false thought. This is the belief in separation. I'm sorry, I'm having a lot of trouble reading this sentence. The belief in separation is the false thought that can never be true. The belief in separation is the false thought that can never be true. False thoughts are all thoughts that are based on the idea of separateness. False thoughts are all thoughts that are based on the idea of separateness, and separation can never be true. False thoughts include, but are not limited to, thoughts of guilt, attack, fear, hatred, and regret. All of these thoughts imply that there is a mind that is separate from yours, with separate will and desire. All of these thoughts imply a conflict now, in the future, or in the past. All of these thoughts are mistaken because none of these thoughts are based on truth. So it's as I mentioned before about sin. You can't have sin unless you have one to do unto another, or at least one to do unto something else, like pollute the environment, right? But there has to be a victim and there has to be a victimizer. And so again, all of these thoughts imply a conflict, right? Guilt, attack, fear, hatred, regret. They all imply some type of conflict. They all imply separation. And this is not true. And in fact, the next sentence is, all that is true is oneness and the activity of oneness, which is love. I remember once I perceived two individuals verbally attacking each other. In fact, there was a lot of really public attack, articles putting each other down, et cetera. And there was a lot of talk about these two individuals attacking each other. And as I did a lot of reading about so-and-so attacked so-and-so, and no, so-and-so was just defending himself because he was attacked in the first place. As I kept reading all of this about these two people attacking each other, every time I would read the word attack, I'd hear this little intuitive no. And what that little intuitive no seemed to be saying is that there's no such thing as attack. And I don't know how long this went on, a few days maybe. But as I kept hearing this no every time I read the word attack, I decided to write with inner wisdom and to ask inner wisdom, is attack possible? And the answer that I got said no, right? That's what the no was all about. No, attack is not possible. And again, primarily that's because in order to have attack, you would have to have one doing unto another. There has to be a victim and a victimizer, right? And what this message told me is that everything that happens here in the world, in this fourth principle of God, no matter how it appears, it's love. Now, we learned this in NTI Ephesians. The message said that love is, so listen to this definition, love is giving through spirit to spirit that which spirit requests. Or I could use the word consciousness. In that case, love is giving to consciousness, through consciousness, that which consciousness requests. You may remember when we were reading NTI Romans, especially chapter 2 and chapter 3, we learned about this idea that came into the mind of consciousness. And the idea was, what if everything was different than it is? In other words, what if there was more than pure consciousness here? Let me go back to my 4 principles of God. So in story form, in the beginning, there was just the first principle of God. The first principle of God is pure, unmanifest, life, intelligence, isness. Now, although there's no way to know how, just like there's no way for Bernadette Roberts to describe the first principle of God, there's no way to know how this occurred, but out of the unmanifest came the manifest, the very first manifest. We could call it the only direct creation of the first principle of God. It's often referred to as the Son of God. And that's the second principle of God. It's the only direct creation of the first principle of God. It's pure consciousness. It's subject alone, but with no object. This is where awareness comes in as we think of the word awareness. Consciousness, the ability to know something, right? That's the only creation of the first principle of God. Again, it's often called the Son of God. It's also called Christ or Christ consciousness. It's also called unity consciousness. It's also called the I am presence. It's the birth of being, right? But not manifest in the way we think of manifest, but it is more manifest than unmanifest. Well, that idea, what if things were different than they are, came into the mind of the second principle of God. So here I am, this subject being with the ability to be aware of something other than myself, but there's nothing here to be aware of. So what if I made stuff to be aware of, right? And out of that idea was born the third principle of God, which NTI calls decision. Think about that, decision. Decision is the creative process. We could say what we decide to put our attention on, especially our believing attention on, creates this energy, which creates the potentiality for manifestation. So decision, the decision to cast believing attention, consciousnesses, believing attention onto something, creates this energy, which creates the potentiality for that energy to be manifest. And in fact, NTI Romans chapter 2 told us that when we had this idea and we looked at this idea and we decided it was a valid idea, that was the beginning of the creative process. And 2 options were born immediately. The first option that we could have cast our attention on was, there can't be anything else. All there is consciousness. The second idea that we could cast our attention on is, whoa, everything has just changed. Now that this creative principle is here, we can create anything we want, right? And what NTI Romans says is we toss that first idea aside and we cast all of our attention on this second idea. And this is what began the world. Well, these 2 original energies are still present in consciousness. There's the energy that points back toward the truth, which NTI often calls the Holy Spirit, but it's the right mind of consciousness is another word for it. And then there's the idea that looks further into fantasy. It's really focused on manifestation, really focused on the fourth principle of God. This is often called ego. So notice the birth of ego is prior to the birth of the person, right? So the ego is about more than the person, more than the idea that I am Regina, this body, mind, personality. The ego is really that the world is reality, that the reality is here instead of up here. So this is where both ego and Holy Spirit are born. And then as we cast attention on the world and as we believe the world, which includes our thoughts about the world, our emotions, as we cast attention on the world and believe the world, we continue to create these energies in the third principle of God that become manifest as attack, as guilt, as blame, as fear, as unworthiness, just, we could go on and on and on. But what this is saying is that all of this is happening within one mind that wanted to have an experience different from truth. And so as that one mind is giving itself what it wants, no matter what that looks like, that's love. Because it's one mind giving itself the experience of something different than truth. There's no separation involved in this. It's one mind giving itself the experience of separation. So love is spirit or consciousness giving to spirit, through spirit, that which spirit requests. And how do we request? We request by placing our believing attention on. I believe in attack. Here comes experiences of attack in the world. I believe in unworthiness. I believe in better than and less than. Here comes experiences of unworthiness, better than and less than into the world, right? Whatever we are casting our attention on, I believe in fear. Here comes fear. But again, remember, the energies in the third principle of God aren't just egoic, because that first energy is also still there, the energy that points till truth. So as we contemplate truth teachings and we place our faith, right, our belief plus desire with the truth teachings, another thing that gets created is what we often call grace. Right? And grace also flows into the dream or the fourth principle of God. So what we cast our believing attention on creates an energy, which is a potentiality that becomes manifest at some point when all the conditions are right for it to become manifest. So as NTI 1 John says, that false thoughts are all thoughts based on the idea of separateness. And then it goes on to say, all of these thoughts imply a conflict now, in the future, or in the past. All of these thoughts are mistaken because none of these thoughts are based on truth, because there's no one to do unto another one. All that is true is oneness and the activity of oneness, right? All that is true is oneness, one mind, the creative principle. All that is true is oneness and the activity of oneness, which is love. It goes on to say, love is the only fact, because oneness is all that is true. Love is giving through consciousness to consciousness that which consciousness requests, which is frequently still an experience that's different from truth. You need not worry that you do not love your brother in truth, because love is all that you're capable of. In other words, the person here is just an effect of what consciousness is placing its attention on. Everything that's going on in the world is a manifestation of where consciousness places its attention. So everything that goes on in the world is love. It's all the activity of oneness. You need not worry that you do not love your brother in truth, because love is all that you are capable of. You only need ask, am I aware of my love? You know, you could say, am I aware that all there is here is consciousness and the movement of consciousness? Is that how I see the world, right? Am I aware that all there is consciousness and the movement of consciousness? Or do I still see victims and victimizers? Do I still see separation? You need not worry that you do not love your brother in truth, because love is all that you are capable of. You only need ask, am I aware of my love? If you are not, you are still believing that which is false. So you're still believing in separation. So you still need to purify your individual mind of these false thoughts. The thinking mind cannot know love, because the thinking mind thinks apart from love. This is a statement of concept, not truth, because in truth, nothing is apart from love. So what this means is the thoughts that come into your mind, the thoughts that come into your mind that say, he insulted me, or she's being rude to that person, or those people are wrong, right? All of these thoughts that come into your mind, even the right-minded thoughts, like, oh, I want to meditate now. All of these thoughts come from the creative principle. Thought is a manifestation. So every thought that comes into your mind is simply a manifestation of where consciousness is placing its attention. It's a creation, a temporary creation. So you can't say that your mind is separate from God. You can't say that your mind is separate from the creative principle, because every thought that comes into that mind is coming directly from the creative principle. It is a manifestation of one of these energies. So it's not true that your mind is separate. However, the mind, being just manifestation, cannot know that which is beyond manifestation. So the thinking mind cannot know love, because the thinking mind thinks apart from love. It's focused on manifestation. It has nothing to do with anything prior to manifestation. I also want to look at 21 to 24. We obey God's commands and do what pleases him, because it is the nature of our existence. This is fact. This is love. We learned this back in NTI Acts chapter 5. What NTI Acts chapter 5 told us is God is life. God is pure, unmanifest life, intelligence, isness. The Father is life. And it told us that the only thing the Father asked of us, the only direct creation, right? The only thing the Father asked of us is to be, to exist. And we still do that. Even if we've gone on our own, kind of further away from the Father with this creative process and this manifestation that has all of these different things going on in manifestation, and this idea that we are people, et cetera, even if we've gone further away from God in all of this, we still are this. And in fact, that's what we're focusing on when we're in our awareness, watching awareness meditation. We still are this. Therefore, we still are being existence, which is the only thing our Father created us to do. No matter what else we may do, we can't stop doing this. So we are always in alignment with God's will. This is what we learned back in NTI Acts chapter 5. We are always in alignment with God's will because we always exist. We always be. We always are life. And that's the only thing we were created to be. So again, verses 21 to 24. We obey God's commands and do what pleases him because it is the nature of our existence. This is fact, and this is love. And I think that's all I want to share from NTI 1 John chapter 3. So hopefully that helped you with this maybe one of the most advanced chapters in all of NTI. We're going to find NTI Jude is pretty advanced too, but it goes right along this same theme. So this video should help you understand NTI Jude when we get there. What I'll do on the review day that's coming up on Monday is I will go over NTI John chapter 4, NTI 1 John chapter 4. And then next week, you'll be listening to an audio, which will go over NTI 1 John chapter 5 and NTI 2 John. So that's still coming. If this video was challenging for you, you might want to watch it 2 or 3 times over the weekend. And then I'll see you on Monday for our review day, which will be day 450. We'll begin our last 10%. So that kind of explains why we're getting to such advanced teachings now, right? All right, I'll see you on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. Bye.